From the very beginning, the Bolsheviks were determined that culture should play a fundamental role in creating a bold, radical new society. Lenin declared, art belongs to the people. It should have its deepest roots in the broad masses of the workers. We must raise the level of education so that art may come to the people and the people. Musicians across Europe and America were tearing up the rulebook in search of fresh, new sounds. There was jazz in New York, the wild harmonic experiments of Schoenberg in Vienna, Stravinsky's futuristic ballets in Paris. But for me, the most cool, kicking, creative place on earth back then was right here in Moscow. This was the brave new world where anything was possible, where music could be as iconoclastic as the new state itself. For musical revolutionaries, it wasn't just innovative instruments that would create the soundtrack to a Soviet utopia. Several hours. This was a new kind of music, said Avramov, designed to evoke the happy chaos of a machine-driven world, where all of society worked together to achieve its revolutionary ideals. For all the debate, no one doubted that music mattered. Whether it was through singing songs to rally people round the Soviet cause, or as a form of education and enlightenment, bringing culture to the masses. It could give voice to the radical spirit and shed light on the class struggle. Whatever your political stripes, people truly believed that music wasn't just a mirror to society, it was a tool to really change things. Kurt Weill was convinced that musicians should be forging the future. If music cannot service society as a whole, he said, it forfeits its right to exist in today's world. He was also determined to bridge the age-old gap between elitist, highfalutin classical music and popular song. What Weill wanted was art for the people, to have his music heard on the grandest stages and also whistled by people out on the street. It was a tall order. What of Brecht and Weill's other aim? That their work should help improve society. Looking back on it years later, Bertolt Brecht liked to claim that this show had genuinely changed attitudes. I'm not so sure about that. Certainly today, the political message has receded, and what you're left with is the infectious brilliance and energy of Kurt Weill's score. Great entertainment with great tunes. Now, I reckon Weill was torn about that. He wanted to change the world, but like any composer, he also really wanted a smash hit. And that is an inherent tension for any political musician. You write something that juicy, and everybody wants a bite. Was a key weapon. Kampflieder, fight or struggle songs were roared out on both sides while the punches were being thrown. A bit like chanting on the football terraces today, this was music as intimidation, as a sign of tribal allegiance. And Horst Wessel had a real nose for this kind of thing. He knew how to write a tune that would summon up the blood during a good old scrap. He called his song Die Fahne hoch, the flag is high. Wessel's song was a mishmash of various other tunes. He even deliberately plundered a communist favourite just to wind them up. His song was easy to sing, easy to march to. It packed a real punch. But it might well have been lost to history had it not been for a dramatic turn of events. Wagner had been the great champion of the Gesamtkunstwerk, a total work of art where music, drama, costumes, stunning visuals all came together to create an epic and intoxicating spectacle. And that was exactly what Hitler wanted to achieve, to turn the Third Reich into a grand stage set for those immersive Nazi spectaculars. Party rallies immaculately choreographed to music. Bands playing, tens of thousands of people marching perfectly in unison, and Hitler up there on the... When he addressed the crowds here in 1933, Hitler intentionally used the phrase that closes Wagner's opera, The Master Singers of Nuremberg. Wach auf, he said, awake. He'd taken the Gesamtkunstwerk out of the opera house and created an emotional, spiritual, almost religious experience to rouse the entire German. Classical music gave the Nazis a veneer of respectability. These weren't thugs, they were civilized people. They loved Bach and Beethoven and Wagner. The problem with that, for me is that I also love Bach and Beethoven and Wagner. And it makes me realise, I think, at a very subconscious level that I think I've always assumed that classical music was a good thing, that it's somehow noble or civilised to love it. And yet, when you think about the relationship between music and National Socialism, that is patently nonsense. Take the job. He was already famous, he didn't need the money, and he certainly wasn't a card-carrying Nazi. He wasn't remotely interested in politics. I think this was about vanity. For Strauss, what mattered most was German culture and his place in it. He'd been banging on for years about issues that were close to his heart, things like copyright, royalties, German music, youth education, and nobody had really paid him much attention. Maybe now things would be different. When Hitler came to power, Strauss's response was, thank God. At last, a Reich Chancellor who is interested in the clues composers leave behind to tantalise us. Crack the code, we think, and we might just understand their innermost thoughts and feelings. Only music isn't that simple. There are no literal answers. It allows us to make of it what we will. And Shostakovich fully exploits that ambiguity in his work. His music is just a masterpiece of grey areas and doublespeak. It's a chimera, a shapeshifter, and even someone as all-powerful as Stalin couldn't control that. Stalin idolised Ivan the Terrible, and he felt there were powerful lessons to be learned from his reign. So Eisenstein and Prokofiev knew their film had to have some kind of nightmare, said Stalin when he saw the movie. Ivan the Terrible was very cruel, he went on. You can show he was cruel, but you must show why it was essential to be. The music has long outlived the politics of the time. But is there something inherently fascist about the bombastic, unreflective emotion written into its very notes? We might like to think that the music we still love today has nothing to do with the dark and distant politics of a terrible time. But I'm not sure it's quite that simple. I suppose if listening to music can't make you a better, more moral person, nor can it by the same token make you an immoral person. That said, Carmina Burana for me is the ultimate piece of empty music, a load of sound and fury signifying nothing. It pushes our buttons and it tries to provoke our basest emotions. I cannot help but hear the hate-filled ideology it grew out of when I hear those notes. And our willingness today to still submit to its power carries with it, I think, a real health warning. That when we embrace music like this, we also have to recognise that it came out of a profoundly evil regime.